Shalom. Welcome to TORAH in the Nations. I'm your host, Brad Mace, with co-host Russell Kirk. What's going on, bud?
Hey, Brad. Everything's going well. I'm glad to be able to get with you and have another one of our famous discussions.
All right. Yes, sir. Me too. You know, we talk a lot about different Torah aspects, and that's what, brought this whole thing into to what it is, so I think we need to keep that going. And, one of the questions after the last podcast we had that I was thinking about was, what do you think are some of the obstacles that non-Jews have when studying the Torah?
Well, let me tell you, Brad, there's a lot of obstacles. It's not as easy as it sounds. And I'm sure on some levels, someone going and finding an English translation of a Torah and sitting down and read it is a level of study, and that obviously is true. But there's a lot lost in translations, and we have to kind of be careful of what translations we use. The Masoric text of the Art Scroll, and I'm going to say, is the best I've run across. I've looked at a lot of them. None of them are perfect. But, the Art Scroll Tanakh and the Art Scroll Chumash are two books that are an absolute must to have if someone's going to study Torah. And so,
do you have one of those books we can show, maybe the Chumash or the Tanakh Art Scroll?
That is a Siddur. Great. This is what the Tanakh could look like by Art Scroll.
No, right.
So if anyone's looking for that, that would be what you would look for. The Chumash is the Torah, the first 5 books of the Jewish writings, and then of course the Tanakh is the writings, the prophets, and the Torah all together. The difference between the two is the Chumash is going to have a lot more commentary on the first 5 books. The Tanakh doesn't have that much in this particular single volume, doesn't have as much commentary.
So when you talk about the translation, you said most of them are similar. You're talking from the Hebrew text to the English text. Is that just the straight translation, or are you talking more on a commentary level, the commentary, the translation?
Look, anything that is translated from one language to another, there's things naturally lost,
right,
and understandings naturally lost. And everyone, no matter who you are, translates with a certain level of eisegesis, which is the product of reading into it, something into the text that
like
may not be there.
Notion of things.
Yeah, and that happens a lot, and it happens with everybody. It's a natural phenomenon that you can't hardly get away from. So you're sitting there reading someone's translating it, and you're naturally reading their preconceived ideas of what this means and what that means, and they're trying to translate the best way they can, because languages don't translate exactly. So Art Scroll, I think, does the best job, but there's things in it that, of course, you're going to think that, well, maybe they could have done a better job and do this. And one of the things is, the more Hebrew you learn, the more you'll recognize this. And, and I guess I'm at the point now to where I know enough Hebrew, which is not a lot, but enough to know that there's no good translation.
Yeah.
So,
you got what you got, and some are better than others. What you got.
So this is obviously not reading the Hebrew is probably the biggest obstacle in Torah study. It would pay for those who can to seriously sit down and learn Hebrew if you have any inkling of being a serious Torah student. It's just something that it has to be done. And but the good thing is there are a lot of things translated, and there's a lot of notes and commentaries, and then there's a lot of rabbis that are willing to teach and explain things to us, to the non-Jew who's seeking Torah understanding. So, I mean, it's not an absolute necessity nowadays to learn Torah, but it's a great benefit in doing so. Because I guarantee you, the more Torah you learn, the more questions you're going to have for the rabbis. It's not going to eliminate questions.
Right.
It's not. But I think that's probably one of the biggest obstacles. Another obstacle would be the difference in the mindsets, the Western mindset of the Gentile mind, and the Hebrew mindset of the Jewish people.
So is this the what we've talked about in the past, a Western mindset compared to an Eastern mindset? Is that what you're?
Yes, it'd be the same thing, or we can call it a Yiddish cup versus a Goyish cup.
No,
that's the way I've had it taught to me. And so it's a Western mindset versus Eastern mindset. It's all these different things, but within that context is the idea of in the Jewish text, an understanding of the Jewish text. There are things that are not held as a this or a that. The Western mindset is basically based on Greek thinking. It's a good way to understand it. It's a Greek thinking process where everything has to be a this or a that. It has to have a absolute reason for being, and that reason is concretized into something that is not changeable. And we have we run into some real difficulties when we see that within some of the Hebrew text and try to understand the Hebrew text. It's I guess one of the stories that I heard that this really fits into is the question in the Talmud. What was the tree in the middle of the Garden of Eden? Was it in Christianity they're going to tell you, well, that's an apple tree, and you don't eat the apple tree. You don't eat from the apple tree. But in the Talmud, you're going to have sages that's going to say that it's grapes, that it's a fig tree, that it's a pomegranate tree, or that it's wheat. Okay.
Well, why do they say it? Like, why so many different opinions?
Well, is each one of them, when the Greek mind looks at it, they ask that question. Well, they don't know what they're talking about. They can't even figure out what it is themselves. They're saying it's this and they're saying it's that, because the Greek mind wants an absolute. They want it to be, it's got to be a this or a that. But within the Hebrew mindset, these rabbis are building what was told to me is a superconscious position. Each one of them is describing an aspect of the tree and what it is. And so when you take all of those aspects and you learn all four of those aspects and you put them together, because you know what it means when they're talking about grapes, when they're talking about figs, when they're talking about pomegranates, when they're talking about wheat, you understand what all that is. Then you put that together and build a super conscious position in which now you know something more about it than if you were thinking about it within a single dynamic. Okay.
Right.
And so when the Western mind concretizes its thinking into a this or that, we limit ourselves into what the Torah understanding is and the way the rabbis and the sages teach. So
would you say, from what it sounds like, what you're saying, a Greek mindset is pretty black and white. It's either this or that, where you get into the Eastern mindset, into Judaism, into the sages, and into the Talmud. They're giving you the array of colors to look at, the whole spectrum, the whole light spectrum.
Yeah.
And you put it together to make one conscious, super conscious position into whatever the subject may be.
Absolutely.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's things that there's things within the Eastern mindset, within the thinking, within Eastern thinking, the Hebrew thought process of the sages and rabbis that are absolutes. Okay? There are things that are absolute. And there are things that you hold loosely, or what the term, or what we call, you hold it loosely. You don't try to concretize it. You don't try to make it a this or a that, because then you lose the whole essence of what it's trying to say to you. And of course, here, when you come across these categories and these things in these particular situations, you have to have a rabbi that is teaching you. You have to learn from a rabbi, and it is almost impossible to successfully learn Torah without the wisdom and the understanding of a rabbi.
Well, that's the whole purpose of the oral Torah, isn't it?
Right. It's the whole purpose of bringing it down. It's the whole purpose of giving the Torah at Sinai to a people. This was the will of Hashem. And what he had planned to do is to give it to a nation of priests and a people that he chose that would accept it and keep it and guard it throughout the generations, as the Jewish people has done. And he, in turn, has kept the Jewish people, as it says in Isaiah 42:6. I will keep them
to be a light to the nation. Absolutely.
And he has kept his promise, and they have kept their promise, because there's always been a righteous remnant of Jewish people that has had the wisdom and understanding of the Torah.
Right.
And so we have to, once you get the problem is you can't once you get out of this, what we call the living transmission. A living transmission from Sinai, and people want to try to argue that point. Oh, well, it don't go back to Sinai, and the tradition don't go back that far. Well, you know what? That's where my Torah begins at it. So that's what I'm going with. That it was given to them at Sinai. So obviously, if it was at Sinai and it's here today, it's made a transition from point A to point B, which is from Sinai to current times. So this living transmission is the mechanism that has brought that Torah from Sinai till present day, a living transmission of Jewish scholars.
So if you're a non-Jew trying to study the Torah and you reject the oral Torah, then you're just setting yourself up for failure the whole time. Basically,
yeah, you're not going to fail, so to speak, but you're going to limit yourself, and it's a fascinating concept. people that reject the oral Torah is working on a limited amount of information, but they're going to tell somebody who is understanding the Torah, both Torahs, the written and the oral, and they're going to tell them that they don't know what they're talking about, or that they're wrong, or that they're doing this, or it doesn't say that. And so we have a group of people working off a limited amount of information, telling people who have a larger database of information that they're not right. And that's a bizarre situation. I think
real bizarre.
It's a bizarre conversation. It's like, well, so if you want to study Torah from the simple Peshat of the text, that is your prerogative to do so, right? And your understanding is from the simple Peshat of the text. But don't be so naive to tell someone who is speaking from the wisdom and understanding of the sages within the oral Torah that they don't know what they're talking about, or that they're wrong, because that's just ridiculous. Right. And so, but that's what happens, because what it is, what I think, and I could speculate, but, certain people don't want the responsibility of learning something other than the written. So they kind of reject it, and it probably simplifies their life some. They're reading a translation of a translation, and they're trying to draw the wisdom and understanding from that simple written text, and that's what they're comfortable with. And so when someone comes up and starts quoting Rashi or Rambam or the Ramban, or they go, I don't want to have to go buy that book. I don't want to have to study that book. I don't want to have to try to understand that book. Right. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I see. Well, I think too, some of it is an ego driven aspect of it. People don't, because you do need that teacher to guide you through the oral. Picking up a Talmud, if you're not, even me, myself, you have a set of Talmuds, I've looked at them, and, we can read through it and we can study through it, but without understanding what's going on and what they're trying to convey, it seems like when I first picked it up, to me, it seemed like more of an argument between two sages, talking back and forth, saying, no, it's this, no, it's that. And then once you start to understand, like you said earlier, they're trying to build this super conscious position, then you're just going to be lost and you're going to get frustrated. And so some people just push back and say, well, I've heard this, and I think you've seen this more than me, from a Christian aspect of it, that, you get preachers up there and say, well, God told me, or the Holy Spirit spoke to me last night.
Mm-hmm.
So when you try to tell them something or say, really it says this, oh no, God told me. Well, as far as I understand, there hasn't been a prophet. There's never been a prophet outside the land, and then surely there's not one now.
I knew an old pastor one time, and he wrote a book. And the title of the book was "God Told Me to Tell You." And basically the whole gist of the book is that if God wanted me to know, he would tell me himself. So
that's what the book was.
That's what the book was. So even within the church, they get that idea of, look, if God wanted me to know, he'd tell me myself. He doesn't need you to come and tell me what he says. Right.
Yeah, I've seen.
And
that.
but anyways, that's. But yeah, it could be, like I said, an ego-based idea, or even but you can run across that even within the oral context. Everybody's got their favorite commentary that they want to lean on. Even certain groups, I listen to the Rambam. Everybody else is I ain't got time for anybody else. I'm just going to tell you what the Rambam says, and whatever the Rambam says, that's what we're doing, which is it's not a bad place to be. But then, what do you do when the Ravad comes up and corrects the Rambam? And,
right.
And then, and that's, then they don't understand.
So that's why you need the rabbinical source on it. You need to have a teacher, a living, breathing teacher to guide you through and walk you through these different aspects.
Because I like it when they say, because when you say something, well, the Rambam says this, the Ravad says this on the Rambam, and then they'll go, well, we don't paskin like the Ravad, which means, we don't read that part of the Bible.
Yeah, well, that's an easy way around it, ain't it?
Yeah, that's just an easy end around right there. This is how we possibly, and my question to him is the Ravad wrong? Was he wrong? Are you, and of course you don't get an answer out of that. But the clarity of the situation is with a rabbi, the rabbi that you're learning from, the rabbi you have a relationship from or with, and who you're comfortable with and who you're learning from. And if somebody's learning from a different rabbi, good for them. Can't you be happy for them and then try to, kind of look down. Oh, well, we've been all through this, those of us that have come out of the church and understood the church. A lot of people come out of the church and they didn't know where they were at to begin with. So they don't have anything to compare them. But those that really understood the church and church working and studied it and was involved in it and understood the arguments and the denominational differences and all these things. And when we see that dynamic within people who are studying Torah, it's a strange situation to look at. It's like, what are these? They're sitting there debating the Bible. What are they? Are they Baptists and Church of Christ here? Is that what I'm listening to? That had all the, if you understand them, all the 50s and 60s where they had all the big debates between the Baptists and the Church of Christ and all these different, different denominations, and to learn the history of that. And so you have that dynamic, because it is a human dynamic within studying religious text. Yeah, people like who they're comfortable with. If they like just the written Torah, if they like the oral Torah, if they like the Kabbalah, if they like this sage over that sage, or this commentary over that commentary. So it's what it is.
Going back to where you started talking about the translation. So if somebody was just wanting to get into studying Torah and they said, well, what would be, of course, you said the Tanakh by Art Scrolls and the Humash are good places, and the commentary. The commentary is where I started, and I still go to the commentary today, and that's been, several years ago, and I think it's a really good place. But what if somebody's to the point where they're reading the commentary, they're reading the Humash, they're going through the Tanakh, and they say, hey, I want to reach out to a rabbi. What would be the best approach or the best advice you can give somebody for approaching a rabbi?
I tell you what, I like the story of Vendell Jones told us one time. And here's Vendell Jones was, and of course we know who Vendell was, the leader of the modern B'nai Noach movement of today, but he was a Baptist preacher in the beginning. And he's figuring this stuff out, and he's got himself in a situation just like you're describing. And he comes there and he goes to find a rabbi to learn from. Hey, well, I got questions. I want answers. I want to go find out. So he goes in, he finds a rabbi, he goes into his office, he sits down there and tells him, hey, look, I've got these questions I want to learn. What do I need to do to learn? Well, the rabbi looks at him. He goes, I'm not going to teach a Baptist preacher anything. Why would I do that? And the rabbi tells him that. And so Vendel gets up and he's walking out the rabbi's office, and he turns off the light to his office as he walks out. And the rabbi said, hey, wait a minute. Come on back in here. And so Vendel came back in his office. Hopefully he turned the light back on. Probably did. And the rabbi says, hey, look, you came in here a Baptist preacher, but you left as somebody wanting to know the Torah. And this idea is because he told the rabbi that, look, you're supposed to be a light unto the nations, and you're not doing it. I come in here to ask you, and you didn't do it. And I was listening to a YouTube today, and it was pretty interesting. As a rabbi, a very popular rabbi, very popular speaking rabbi on YouTube and everything. And he was telling stories of Christians asking him questions. And the gist of his comments was that today is a different world. He was saying that Gentiles and Christians today are asking honest questions, and they want to hear the answer from a rabbi, and they accept the answer that the rabbi gives them. They don't necessarily, they might not believe it, they may not agree with it, but they accept the answer that's coming from them. And he goes, it's just a different day, because all the time he's sitting there telling these different stories of him answering these questions, he's ready for the hammer to come down,
Yeah.
And so, but he said he's not seeing that anymore. He's not seeing that here in 2022. That he's seeing, that he said, and the gist of it is that it is a different day. And the rabbis need to understand that this is a different day. And there are non-Jews who have questions and who are expecting the Jewish people to know the answers and to give the answers. But it's very difficult to do.
Well, we live in the internet age now where information is just at your fingertips. 20 years ago plus that, it was if you wanted to, if you wanted to study the Bible, you went to church. There was no Google, and maybe your family had an encyclopedia at the house, but, they did, all they had was just the Bible, so if you wanted to learn the Bible, you went to church. Period. There was no other. Maybe the library. If you had a local library, but if you were if you lived in a rural area, you didn't have access to a good library even to begin with. Even if your town had one, unless you lived in a big city, Dallas, Austin, close to here. So with the internet today, people are Googling these questions they have and realizing, wow, this is a rabbi giving a answer to this question I've had for 15 years, and I've asked my pastor and he said, don't worry about it. Basically, we've all experienced that. So,
well, the thing about it is, Brad, you may wind up getting in trouble with Rabbi Google eventually.
Right. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
The idea is to develop a relationship. The rabbi can be on the internet or be on Google or something like that, but you need to develop a relationship with a rabbi to where he can talk to you and explain to you your questions and your thoughts and your ideals, or someone that you can contact and ask, hey, am I on the right track here? This is what
personal relationship.
A personal relationship.
Absolutely.
That is the only way it works, really and truly, to the learning process is to have personal relationships, friendships with a rabbi that's taking the time to answer your questions. He knows where you're at. He understands where you're asking the question from, and he's taking the time to be involved with you and answer the question in the way that you need it answered to where you could best understand it. And if you, and the trick to getting an answer to a rabbi is you basically got to know the answer before he'll tell you what it is, or you got to get close enough to where he's going to say, well, Russell's going to wind up figuring this out anyway. I might as well go ahead and tell him, Right. So it is, the rabbis are not looking for your answers. You don't have to call up a rabbi and sit there and tell him the answer to something. Number one, he already knows the answer to it. And number two, he's not wondering about how well you can repeat an answer that you heard from somewhere else. What the rabbis want to do is they want to see where you are at by how you formulate a question, how well that question is asked. You want to get a good answer from a rabbi, you ask him a good question. Absolutely. And so that's kind of the key to developing that relationship with the rabbi and asking the right questions and getting the answers that you need to move along with your study at whatever pace you're moving along. Let me
ask you this. So, for you, if you're watching a YouTube video or you see a lesson that's put out on the internet on a website, and the rabbi, he's going over the content of the what they're studying, and you want to contact this rabbi, you just email him. Is that how you approach him? And just say, hey, you were talking about, these different levels of the soul. What is that? What do you mean when you say neshama compared to, ruach? What is that? And then just send that email to him. Is that how you've kind of developed relationships over the years with Rabbi, or has it been, have you approached it differently?
Well, if you contact a rabbi and you're asking the difference between ruach and neshama for the levels of the soul, you may or may not get an answer, because it's maybe too rudimentary of a question, and they may think, well, this person may not be at the spot to where he needs to know the difference between a ruach and a neshama, or something like that. That could definitely happen. I can listen to a teaching, and I did this just last week or so, a week or two ago, and on the YouTube of a rabbi I never listened to before, and in a style I never listened to before. It was a New York yeshiva teaching, and the rabbi was teaching this year to people that were yeshiva trained and understood things the way he was telling them. And I heard something in it that I not necessarily disagreed with, but I wanted to, explain my point of view to him about it. And he basically, and he wrote me back, and he answered the question. He said, and basically he gave me the answer that I just gave you. He said, that class really wasn't intended for you. And he said, you're right. He told me, you're correct, but that class wasn't intended for you. And the way it was taught was not intended for you. It was basically taught for somebody who had yeshiva training and understood the position where he was coming from. And so we both come to the conclusion that maybe I was a little too abrupt with assuming something that he was not necessarily intending for it to be. But in the context of what he was teaching, it was It was correct. So you have to be careful watching people, rabbis on the internet, kind of know the background of them, know where they're coming from. If you can find that out, if you find somebody you like, and you find somebody that's connecting with you, then good, and then try to learn from them. And the more you sit there and listen to them, and the more you engage with them, the more you're going to understand how they're teaching and what they're teaching, and the more you're going to learn from them. It's not, especially when we're dealing with the non-Jewish audience. They're not going to tell you, a rabbi is not going to tell you everything that he would tell a group of people that would be yeshiva trained or Jewish or whatever. I've had rabbis ask me, I would bring them into an audience of people to speak, and they would ask me, who's going to be in there? Are they going to be? Is it just going to be Jews and non-Jews, or all non-Jews, or who am I talking to? Are they B'nai Noach that have studied the Torah for a while? Are they brand new? Are they new? They're trying to figure out how to teach
what their best approach would
class.
be, right.
And their best approach.
Right.
I mean, these guys. I mean, you got to figure out. Rabbis are really educators, and they have tools on how to best educate people. And they're going to try to find out the best tool to educate you where you're at. Many, many years ago, I used to think almost that was insulting. Like, just tell me what it is. Don't try to meet me where I'm at. Well, you know what? Sometimes that's
probably the best approach.
A little ambitious, a little too ambitious of an approach. If a rabbi is willing to teach you where he thinks you're at, then good.
Just let it be.
If you think that's too low a level, then prove to him that it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Ask the right questions.
Asking the questions will get you where you want to be, but you got to be able to formulate that question to get to where you want to be. And
that's key.
Going back to what you're saying is that it's all about the question, formulating the right question. But going back,
that is key.
Going back and talking about different study material and the translations of different study materials, and I agree 100% with the Humash and Tanakh Art Scrolls edition. What are some other things that you think are some pitfalls for the non-Jew that's just getting into Torah, that just says, hey, I'm going to read this thing, like I'm going to approach it from the aspect of Old Testament to Torah, and I want to see a Jewish perspective into this. So besides, of course, reading the Torah, the Humash, and the Tanakh are where anybody should start. I agree 100%. But what are some other things they can add to or do to elevate their level of understanding?
Well, I've looked at this a long time, Brad, as you know, and I came from a position of teaching and educating Christians, and learning from pastors, to transitioning into learning from rabbis and trying to teach, people who are interested in the Torah. But we talked earlier about mindset. Well, what is some of the dynamics of a mindset that I found that was problematic for the Christian or the non-Jew coming over and trying to understand the rabbis and understand Judaism and understand how, the thinking goes on? And I really think a lot of stumbling blocks are created with the idea of the soul, as far as, what is the soul, and from the Christian Greek mindset to the rabbinical rabbinical Hebrew mindset. How's it? And so there's a big difference in the way the two think. So you've got to understand, if you're going to understand Torah and the rabbis and Hebrew literature and text, commentaries and all this, you have to have a good understanding of the Jewish perspective of the soul and what it does. And, we can kind of go over that and lay some foundation for that, because I think a lot of things that we're going to get into talking about and some of the topics that we've discussed in the past, as you know, they all kind of hinged around understanding a little bit of the Jewish perspective of the soul. And so there's 5 levels to the soul. And I'm talking about just what I want to talk about here in this context is just a very basic overview, right quick, of it. So you have 5 levels within the Jewish perspective of the soul: the nefesh, the ruach, the neshama, the chaya, and the yechida. Okay. And so the chaya and the yechida are very, very high levels of the soul that are more closely connected with God. And there's not a lot we can understand about that and about those levels of the soul. And there's not a lot that's taught about them. There's not a lot that's said about them. I did learn something the other day that I thought was quite interesting about these 2 higher levels of the soul, and that they did not fall when Adam fell. Those levels of the soul did not fall, or with Adam, or let's call it, those levels of consciousness did not fall with Adam. And of course we could talk about, these 2 higher levels of the soul. It was said that Enoch's consciousness was elevated to the level of Adam's chaya and yechida. Okay. And so he basically here, he was no more. He was elevated to that level of consciousness. And I found that was interesting to learn that about that aspect, because it kind of explains what was going on with Enoch and kind of explains that. But if I would have not had any understanding of those 2 terminologies like you're talking about, I would have had no idea what they were talking about. You see what I mean? So learning terminologies, learning about these different levels of the soul, what they are and what they do, how they work, how they're talked about, is important. Just like the aspects of the world, the same way. All of these terminologies are good to have in your vocabulary and understand their meaning and their location and kind of what's going on with it. And then, study Torah and on a Peshat level, but, have some kind of working knowledge of these things. One of the best books, I think, to just read, to kind of get a grasp on all of these terminologies that we're talking about here, it would be Rabbi Ari Kaplan's Inner Space. Okay.
Right.
It's wrote very well. It's very understandable. It's a very good book. Yeah. Very clear. But I've talked to people, in two different contexts really about the book. I've talked to people that say they've read it 3 times and they have got no idea what it says. Well,
Well,
that is because you need the book taught to you.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You can read all the books in the world, but like I said, there is a difference when it's being taught to you and being explained to you and articulated to you. But it's a good book to read as far as
Trying to
learning
grasp
terminologies.
To learn terminologies. That's where I was going with it. Absolutely.
And get an introduction to it. And then I've talked to people who've read it one time, and they start talking about aspects within it, and it's they believe they know what it's talking about, and you're like what in the world are they saying?
Yeah.
So
right. I've learned this through my own studies. I will read certain books and literature, and I'll say, "Man, that just went right over my head." And then I'll pick up the Torah and start reading it, and then I'm like, "Man, there it is. That's what they were talking about, or that's part of what they were talking about."
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
It's just being exposed to the different terminologies within the Torah, I think, are the most important part. Don't get frustrated if you pick up the book and you say, "Man, I totally don't understand what they're talking about. I have no idea what this word means or how it relates to Torah." Just keep going. Just keep going. Like you said, find you a teacher, ask the questions, and that's the best approach on anything. I think for me, if I would say what I think is one of the biggest pitfalls for the non-Jew trying to study Torah is, like you said earlier, is trying to make things this or that, saying, well, this is what this is, and this is what this means. That's the biggest problem. Just hold it loosely and understand that the more you start to immerse yourself in these different terms and aspects in Torah, you will eventually get to a point where you'll start understanding or getting an understanding of what's going on with the right teacher and the right literature and the right study habits.
Yeah. And, one of the things I did early on that I think was helpful and that in the aspect is that I would be learning, and I'm talking about, learning with a rabbi, sitting down, having a conversation with him, learning from him. But I would go and learn from another rabbi, maybe on similar subjects or something similar. And then I was able to come in to the other rabbi and say, well, what about this? Well, I heard, I said this and I heard this and I brought this in. Now you're interjecting concepts and stuff to the rabbi you're learning from, and he can expound on them both even more. What he was teaching, what something you heard from another rabbi say, and now he can put them together and expound on them more. And you wind up learning at a more accelerated rate. So the more exposure you have to different rabbis, the better it is. There's going to be people that's going to tell you this that it gets confusing. They say actually that you learn Kabbalah from many teachers, and you learn halakha from one teacher, and that makes a lot of sense. But if you use more than one perspective, and you bring them other perspectives in, and they can build on it, then it's kind of like what you're doing with with what's happening in the Talmud, where these rabbis are building off of one another, one perspective to the other perspective, and making a as we call it, a super conscious position out of it. So it's good to have a teacher that you have a personal relationship with, but then it's good to listen to others and broaden your perspective and answer the questions and stuff like that.
Right. And I
if you
think
can do it.
just like you were saying, just let yourself be exposed to different aspects with different literature and stuff. And that's it. I think going back to the very beginning, what you were talking about, the translations, how can somebody, if they find a book, they say, oh, this topic is interesting. This is, okay. For instance, one that I know that could be troubling for some people is the book of Enoch. They say, oh, there's the book of Enoch. How can it be bad? It's talking about Enoch. So you'll hear people say, oh, we'll stay away from the book of Enoch. Or then you'll say people, well, this book is the good book of Enoch. How going forward would you be able to, and I guess really it goes back to having the teacher to tell you.
Right.
If you don't have that person, then there's no way that if you're exposing yourself to something that's kosher or not kosher.
Yeah, when you're getting into that genre of books and you don't have a teacher, you're gonna wind up getting in trouble. There's different books of Enoch, and you have the people that believe certain things about him. How authoritative Enoch 1 is versus Enoch 2 or 3 Enoch. Which one is which, what they're doing. So you learn the history behind them, and you have a teacher that can help you with them and that can advise you on which one is which. And then after all of that, you learn how to hold that information lightly and don't try to make it a this or a that. And so it's very important to understand what you're reading, what you're studying, and how it works, and how it can enhance your study of Torah by understanding some of the things of these books. Just like what I was talking about earlier about the levels of the soul and Enoch, and something that on that level. It's good to have and have that information, and it may bring forth some deeper wisdom and understanding in something else you're studying later on. You can sit there and concretize it and make it into something that is destructive to your learning of the Torah, and prohibits you from learning Torah. So you've got to, have that kind of understanding when you're looking at these books. You got to understand who's translating it, understand some history about the book and what it is, and the book of Jasher is something else that I can think of.
So just knowing the translator's background would go a long ways. Knowing who he is and, what is this guy about? Reading the preface on a book. That's, I can't help but to pick up a book these days and I immediately go to the back of it. I read the back of it and I start reading the preface. And I either say, well, this guy's a Christian talking about Jewish concepts and, using Jewish terminology. So I know I'm going to stay away from that, because 99% of the time Christians reject the oral Torah. So if you see a Christian doing a translation and giving commentary on the oral Torah, you're like, that's a red flag. I ain't going there. So even though the translation may be fine, he may be a scholar, a translator, but definitely, don't read into the commentary.
Right. Because you want to stay within the living transmission of wisdom and understanding. Right. You want to learn from somebody who learned from somebody who learned from somebody, and that stayed within the
Sinai tradition.
Jewish. Yeah. You want the Jewish mindset of Torah, and somebody that stayed within that. And that's who you want to learn from. That's who you want to read, and that's who you want to understand. Now, the other, the problem with a lot of times with people getting into these extra esoteric type of books and things, is people want to know, and I'm saying people, I'm talking about especially non-Jews, they become interested in the secrets. Oh, I want to know the secret. I want to know the biggest secret. I want to know this thing, and I want to know that. And that's all they become interested in, is knowing the secrets, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. I get it. I understand it. And that may be what their soul is desiring to know. Maybe it's what their soul needs to know. But you have to learn those secrets within the context of what you're learning. You can't just be seeking the highest level of wisdom and knowledge and kind of skim over the basics. You know, try to be balanced. You know, try to learn some halakha and try to learn some. So
Kabbalah.
Earlier try to learn.
You used the word. You used the word pashat earlier, just so people out there that may not understand what you mean by when you say pashat. And there's different levels of understanding. Can you kind of explain a little bit about pashat and sod and these different levels?
The pashat is just the simple understanding of it. The sod would be the secret understanding behind it. There is the drosh and the remez and those different levels of understanding the Torah. So you can be learning from a rabbi that is discussing something within a particular level. And so you kind of have to understand where he's at, where they're teaching from, what part of it they're teaching, and understand if they're teaching you something from the pashat or something from the sod, and you understand better what they're telling you because you know where they're coming from. You know, it's said that the Torah has 70 faces that means 70 different understandings of every verse in the Torah. So there's many different levels that you can learn on, and one man's floor is another man's ceiling. You know, you can be discussing something and it could be very simple to someone, or it could be way over somebody's head over the next person. And so it's kind of why the rabbis understand who they are and what they're teaching to and what they're doing. Like I said, there's rabbis that don't necessarily teach you everything. They'll stop at a certain place. There's rabbis that have and will privately teach you everything, teach you anything, if they know who you are and understand that you can comprehend what they're telling you, and they know that you'll be responsible with it for as the way that you handle the information. There's a lot of debate that goes on about Torah study within the non-Jewish world. Who can study Torah? Who can't study Torah? You can go from every extreme imaginable, from the non-Jew can't study Torah at all till and you got all these people sitting out there. You can't study Torah at all. And then there's ones that are teaching Kabbalah, on all over YouTube, and all different kind of groups are teaching esoteric teachings and stuff like that. So you really don't know who to believe or what to believe when you come across these situations. The non-Jew can't study Torah; he's liable of the death penalty if he even study the Torah. And then they'll come back. I've watched the whole transition of all this over the last 20-something years. Oh, you can't study Torah at all. Oh, well, you can study Torah from Genesis and up to the 20th chapter of Exodus. Oh, you can only study Torah that's associated with the 7 laws, and on. Oh, now, you can study the whole Tanakh now, all of a sudden. But you can't study the Kabbalah. But then yet you got 20 Noahide groups out there teaching Kabbalah.
Yeah, it don't make much sense.
I
agree.
Where we're at and why this is a problem nowadays is like I said earlier about this is a different age, and the rabbi who was getting the questions asked to him by the Christians realized that we're in a different era. Well, the rabbi's getting the questions asked to him by the Torah observant non-Jew should be seeing the same thing and realizing that there's people at different levels asking different questions, and they should be teaching accordingly, to where they're at. I agree that there's 99% of the non-Jewish world shouldn't get nowhere near any esoteric teachings. I get it. But that doesn't say that there's still 1% of the righteous from among the nations that are capable and that should be learning the more esoteric teachings, if that's where they're being led to and they're capable of doing it. And of course they can learn it. And of course they do it. We look at the relationship between Rabbi Yehuda and Antoninus in the Talmud and stuff, and we look at that relationship of learning. We can understand that there's that level of Torah understanding within the nations, as well as a very simple. Somebody can, they have to be, explained what we talked about, the simple pashat of the text, because, and then you go up from there and you have to be explained the simple pashat of the text within the translation. Oh, well, this translation's like this, and this is like that, and this is how this works, and why they translated this word like this and why they translated it like that. And so, there's all different levels of just learning pashat.
Right.
But then
just
there's
right.
Yeah, just a pashat. But then there's those that go on and on and on, and for whatever reason and for whatever purpose. But the thing to remember is why we're doing all this is that it's said that we are in the final footsteps of Mashiach. And the closer that we get to the Mashiach, the more these esoteric teachings are going to come to the surface, and people's going to want to know them, and the nations are going to want to know them, and people are going to want to know the secrets, and then they're going to want to know the pashat, they're going to want to know the sod, they're going to want to know everything about the Torah that they can possibly grasp, because the essence of the Mashiach is drawing nearer to us. And that's why you're talking about. And that's
what Rabbi Ashlag was talking about in the Shadow of the Ladders.
What's that?
That the time would come to where this needs to get out to the people, that people would start coming up and wanting to know these esoteric concepts and terminologies and different aspects of the Torah. And Rabbi Ashlag of the Shadow of the Ladders kind of walks you through a guide to start, being able to understand and grasp these different aspects, So there's all kinds of literature out there. And like you're saying, we're not in a position, just like the rabbis are not, to tell, or some, rabbis more in a position to tell somebody where they're at and what they should learn, because they develop that personal relationship with them, so they can guide them through those different aspects and explain to what needs to be known to that person.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you can't get anywhere without that personal relationship. And they're hard to come by. Rabbis, there's really very few rabbis that'll take the time. And then the ones that do have their time taken up, and it's tough to get. And, so if you can find a rabbi that's willing to invest some personal investment within you, then you've came a long way, and you have a very, very special thing. When you can find that rabbi that's willing to sit down and teach, and know that he's preparing the nations for the Mashiach, and getting the world ready. And as I think we're going to see as time progresses, more and more people coming out, accepting it. I think we're even going to see, and I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I think we're going to see people demanding it. As this one rabbi was saying in the YouTube, hey, you need to tell me. I need to know this stuff. You're the one with the light to the nations. You're the one with all the wisdom and understanding. You got the Torah given to you at Sinai. What are you doing?
Right.
Yeah,
it's definitely the time is everything seems to be accelerating as far as people coming to the Torah. 20 years ago, when we first, started really studying the Torah and wanting to know everything we could about it, every aspect, we were all over the place. I remember, I was buying 2 or 3 books a week on Amazon, and, only maybe 25% of those books are were any good, but, we didn't know. We didn't have all the access to information that we have now. And that comes along with, we've gone through several different rabbis. Not that, we're saying any rabbis, or I'm not saying any rabbis that I've ran across that I didn't think were good. It's just that you develop these different relationships depending on where you're at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
The non-Jewish library of Jewish books is a very fickle thing. I've probably gone through, you see all these books behind me, and you've been in this room, and all the books around the room and stuff like that. But, I've probably gone through 3 sets of this amount of books that you go through, you get rid of, you do this, you do that.
Let somebody borrow one.
Or that one, that's a given. Somebody borrow one, then you got to go buy another one. I
think one of those copies, one's over here, right there next to me somewhere. That's for one of them.
And they, but you see, you go through a lot of it, or you have a series. You may get 2 books out of a series because that 2 books has something in it you want to know about. The rest of the series is probably good, but you don't have them because you just wanted to know this part because that's where you're at. Right. So you got all these partial series of books and pieces and things, and some you use, some you don't. But I like what one rabbi told me. He said, a scholar is only as good as his library. So
absolutely.
If you are going to study the Torah, you've got to have a good library to reference materials, and you got to find something that's good. And it's tough to find something that is translated in English or Hebrew and English together to where you can understand, and that's going to benefit you. You just have to wait till that book exists, and we don't know what book it is.
Right.
So you got to look through a lot of books, and you go through a lot of things. And so hopefully what we can do in this podcast, Brad, is kind of mention books like we mentioned tonight. We mentioned Inner Space by Ari Kaplan. And Ari Kaplan alone is a great rabbi.
Oh, yes. I've never run across an Ari Kaplan book that I didn't like. Now, every one of them, I can tell you this is, has been a major part of my Torah study, because I always go back to it. Even Inner Space, as many times as we've been through it, I'm ready for a refresher too, because it's been that long, to get some of these terminologies back, definitely for me. But going back to that particular book, Inner Space, we do have access to lessons on that book.
Right. Yeah.
Mike Matledge. I don't know how many. I'm thinking it's like 20 plus lessons.
25, I think it was 25 lessons.
25 lessons, and they're not 10-minute little lessons either. They're 45 minutes to an hour long lessons, and that's something in this podcast as we publish it. I will link to the to each episode, so if somebody's interested in that, it'll definitely be posted up there for them to have access to it.
And, he's got a YouTube page where just those
right
lessons are, and it's the Kabbalah of Adam Facebook group, and he has a YouTube page where he's got these teachings categorized and put out. And so, if you can share some links like that to people that can get some of those teachings and understandings, it's good. I'm sure there's other people that have that's probably taught that book, Inner Space. It's that popular.
Mm-hmm.
You could find some, but then again, you go out onto the YouTube and to the internet, and you start trying to Google something and find something. You got to know a little bit about the person that's teaching it, and where they're coming from and what they're doing, and and I know that Mike Matledge is sincere, and I know who he's learned from. And
he's a good teacher. He explains the material in a way that gives you, that you walk away from it saying that I have more of an understanding, but at the same time I have more questions.
No,
and I think that's I think that's part of being a good teacher, is that when somebody's teaching you something. I go through this all the time with you. You'll be explaining something one night, and it'll totally just, man, I didn't get it. And then a couple of days later, it'll just be like, oh, man, that's okay. All right, here we are. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's part of it. I think a good teacher does that. They light the fire. They shine light and create new sparks, into your desire to study Torah and to grasp concepts that you thought were too far out of your reach to understand at the time. They put them into perspective to where, like you said, a rabbi wants to know, who am I talking to, so that they can explain the material in the best way for you, so that you could approach it. Because if they just come in and they just, they're talking on this level up here, level, and, you're down here, then you walk away from it, not even be able to formulate a question because you have no idea what you just heard. So, and I've ran into that too,
And that's okay. It's okay. You don't have to, you can take in the information and hold on to it lightly. You don't have to feel like you have to do everything you hear. You have to automatically or immediately understand. Sometimes there's questions or ideas or concepts that float around for years, if not decades, before you grab a good grasp on it. And it's those questions, those things you don't understand, that drives you to study more Torah, and study more and study more and study more, and look into it and look into that. Oh, well, let me see if this book's going to answer this question, or if this teacher's going to talk about this question I had over here. And it drives you to learn more. So it's, as far as I know, unless you're in a college course or something where you're not being graded,
Right.
Just learn and absorb what you can. And the more you expose yourself to, the more you're going to elevate your consciousness. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about these different levels of the soul. Each level of the soul elevates from the next one. You have a higher consciousness and a higher consciousness and a higher consciousness. And Torah study is a major factor in the development and advancement of your consciousness. And so, you have to test yourself and challenge yourself and take on a little bit more, take on bigger and bigger endeavors in your study. And, always have the expectation that, you're going to learn one thing. I've seen many times where just one statement, one phrase, and 20 things will come together. Oh, I get it now. Oh, I understand that. Oh, I understand this. Oh, I get that. Then you can go to your rabbi and you say, hey, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And he goes, oh, yeah, you're right on. Then you know what you're doing. We're not, like I said, we're not, waiting on some kind of, spiritual guide or something to come in and give us some super secret information or something like that. I don't think any of us is at that level to where that happens. But if, not to say that it's not going to happen or it can't happen, but even if it did happen, I'd still go ask the rabbi, hey, what about this?
Right.
What about that? And that leads to the interesting thing, especially for rabbis, and the ones that I know that I have a personal relationship with over a longer period of time, I think they have realized the value that there is with learning with a non-Jew who is, sincere and conscientious about learning Torah, because the thing about it is we ask questions from different perspectives that they would never think about. And I know I've heard many times, well, I never thought about it like that. I never looked at it that way before. I never did. They didn't come from a perspective that someone from the nations would come to. And the rabbis wind up learning more and having a more deeper insight, not only to teaching non-Jews, but to the Torah itself, because they never seen this. They never looked at something from that perspective before, from a perspective that we would bring into it to ask this question, well, what about this? I never had to think about that before. Never looked at it like that before. And so that's really a benefit of learning with the righteous from among the nations, can give to a serious Torah scholar wanting to learn and wanting to get deeper themselves. They have to look at something from a fresh perspective. So why not learn with a righteous non-Jew? Why not?
Well, yeah, and I hear this all the time. I never heard this, and just being honest, in Christianity, I never heard, well, let's learn together. But that seems to be what is constantly said when you're approaching different rabbis and different Torah scholars in Judaism is, well, let's learn together. You know what I mean? Like, it seems to me they never stop learning, and they understand this concept better than anybody, that everybody can learn from each other. Even though we might be on different levels, doesn't mean we can't learn from each other. And I think that's the beautiful part of Torah.
I'll tell you one of the fascinating things that I've seen with rabbis is how they have a teacher lifelong. They have a lifelong teacher until their teacher passes on. They have that teacher, and they have a teacher. And all the rabbis, no matter how successful or knowledgeable they come, they always have a teacher, or always had a teacher that they refer to. And I find that whole concept fascinating, that they would have that relationship with their teacher,
right?
And how important it is to them. And it's, guess what? It's just as important to the righteous from the non-Jew. from the nation, the non-Jew from the nations, to have a relationship too, and to have a teacher. Yeah, it'd be nice if we could find someone that we could learn with for decades on time. We could learn our entire life as well. But it's tough. It's tough to find those rabbis because the Jewish mindset right now is that they're not sending out teachers to the nations. I mean, the Mormons can do it, and the Jehovah's Witnesses can do it. Everybody, they can all do it, but the true light to the nations is not doing it.
Right.
And I get it. I get the history. I understand, guys.
Yeah.
But no one's trying to start any more programs. I believe they're not. I hope not, anyway.
Yeah,
it's just a time.
Yeah, we're, like you said, going back to what you watched on YouTube, we're just in a different time, and I could say this, mm-hmm. This is, out of everything, the more I come to know in Torah, I start to realize the less I know. You know what I mean? Just, it never stops. You think, well, I know this and I know that, and I have a grasp on this, and then I realize how little I actually know. The more I study, the more I learn that I don't know, and you think,
one man's floor is another man's ceiling.
That's exactly right. The more you know, the less you know, and it's, and I think that's a beautiful part of it. And Russell, I appreciate the time. And I think with what we're doing here, is hopefully what it does for people. It gives them a little bit of a shortcut. It can maybe shave 20 years, down to 5 years into being able to access this information and approach it in a way that's more organized and not all over the place. If we can isolate some material to a broad audience and put it out there to say, this is a good book. This is a good translation. This is a good, a good place to look. And I think just doing that will definitely save people some pitfalls along the way.
Man, I hope so, Brad, because, a lot of us, and you've been there for a pretty good while of it, a lot of us had a long, hard road trying to learn Torah, trying to figure it out, from nothing, and what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it and what the best ways is to do it. So if someone can learn from the experiences we had and make their progression a little faster and a little easier, then I think that's a good thing. And I think what you're doing here in trying to present some of this information in this format is going to help out a lot of people. So I really appreciate your efforts.
Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate it. And just in the future, we will, when we post this material out onto YouTube, we will put links and some different information along with the episode. So just be on the lookout for that. It'll be coming along sooner than later. So I want to thank everybody, and thank you, Russell.
All right. Thanks, Brad.